The room descends into complete darkness. A shadowy figure slowly emerges from the corner. It has wide, unblinking eyes and a mouthful of huge teeth. You know you are entirely alone in your home. The creature steps closer, but you cannot scream or run away. The monster is entirely a product of your own mind. It feels completely real to your terrorized senses. The entity will not leave when you turn on the lights. This is not a nightmare, and it is not madness. It is a terrifying reality for millions of people worldwide who suffer from a condition known as Charles Bonnet Syndrome. It affects an estimated 47 million visually impaired people globally. The syndrome is a dark and profound medical mystery. It occurs when a person loses their vision. The human brain simply refuses to accept the encroaching darkness. Starved of normal visual input, the rebellious brain opens its own vast library of stored memories and projects them into the external world. Patients are forced to live with bizarre and unprompted visions. Their waking lives become a continuous, unpredictable, silent movie. They see Victorian-era figures walking up and down their stairs. Some patients watch giant spiders crawling across familiar surfaces. Others see grotesque gargoyles with prominent teeth floating midair, or watch a towering dinosaur carrying a lunchbox. Another saw snakes swarming the floor of a local pharmacy. Shadows in a bedroom easily transform into silent, menacing intruders.
Can you describe
The patients know perfectly well that these visions are fake. Their cognitive functions remain completely intact and utterly normal. Yet they cannot banish the vivid monsters from their sight, suffering through a bizarre phenomenon formerly known as visual release hallucinations. The syndrome takes its name from a Swiss naturalist. Charles Bonnet first described this condition in the 18th century. His aging grandfather, a magistrate named Charles Lullin, suffered from severe cataracts. Lullin began seeing things that were completely impossible. He saw a blue handkerchief with orange circles floating midair and watched silent carriages and buildings materialize out of absolutely nothing. Sometimes he saw handsome young men visiting his home. The elderly magistrate knew his mind was playing tricks. He had intact cognition and remained entirely sane. He realized his brain was creating fictions to replace his lost sight. Over 2 centuries later, medical science finally caught up with him to explain the frightening mechanics behind these visions. We now understand this condition as a sensory deprivation phenomenon. In a healthy body, the retina sends constant electrochemical signals. The optic nerve streams this visual data to the brain. The visual cortex relies on this constant input to function properly. This steady stream of light acts as a strict regulatory mechanism until conditions like macular degeneration or glaucoma sever the vital connection. The visual cortex suddenly finds itself starved of external data. The brain does not simply shut down the visual centers. Instead, the neurons become dangerously hyperactive and highly excitable. The visual association cortex fires spontaneous signals into the void. This process is medically known as the deprivation hypothesis, and it operates remarkably similar to the famous phantom limb syndrome. An amputee will often feel pain in a missing leg. A visually impaired person essentially sees with a missing eye. The brain tries desperately to fill in the missing information. It pulls fragments of memories, shapes, and faces from the subconscious. It stitches these raw fragments together into highly complex hallucinations, which functional brain imaging reveals as spontaneous activation in the visual cortex. Different types of hallucinations activate highly specific brain regions. When a patient sees deformed faces, the fusiform gyrus lights up. When they see landscapes, the parahippocampal gyrus fires uncontrollably. The psychological toll of Charles Bonnet syndrome is absolutely devastating. Many patients are entirely unaware of this medical condition, so they experience sudden blindness, followed by terrifying, lifelike hallucinations. Their immediate thought is that they are losing their minds. Patients fear they are developing dementia or profound schizophrenia. They choose to suffer in silence rather than face extreme stigma. Studies show that only a small fraction voluntarily report their symptoms. Up to 60% attribute their visions to serious mental illness, and 2/3 remain terrified of being permanently labeled as insane. The horrific visions force them into deep social isolation. A patient might see a corpse resting in their bed. They watch disembodied heads wriggling through the air. They see a screaming ghost manifested in a shadow. They carry this immense burden without telling their closest loved ones, because for decades, doctors also misunderstood the root cause of these visions. Patients were tragically misdiagnosed and admitted to psychiatric wards. They were heavily medicated for psychotic disorders they did not have. Today, medical awareness is slowly beginning to improve worldwide. Still, there is no definitive cure for the terrifying hallucinations. Management relies primarily on providing reassurance and deep psychological support. Those simple behavioral techniques can sometimes interrupt the terrifying visual episodes. Patients are told to rapidly blink or change the room's lighting. Sometimes simply walking away from the vision breaks the spell. These coping mechanisms help patients regain a small measure of control. Brain neuroplasticity is a double-edged sword. It demonstrates an astonishing capacity to adapt to sensory loss while proving that the mind will construct its own reality to avoid absolute emptiness. This syndrome proves that seeing is not just a function of the eyes. We are forced to watch the show without closing our eyes. The darkness within us is far more vivid than we know. A starved mind will always find a way to feed itself. We must ultimately rely on our brains to interpret the world, but when the brain breaks its own rules, we are utterly defenseless. The monsters we fear the most already live inside our heads. The brain prefers to surround us with monsters rather than sit in the dark.